He drops out of college, starts with a tiny company in a garage, and then ignites a technological revolution that changes the world. But the most shocking part isn't that, because he actually gets fired from the very company he founded. And years later, he returns to lead a revolution that puts the world into our pockets. Steve Jobs. Was he a genius, a tyrant, or the greatest visionary of our time? Once you hear this story, you will never look at technology the same way again. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco. Immediately after birth, he was given up for adoption and raised by Paul and Clara Jobs. His adoptive parents gave him a loving but ordinary American life, yet Steve never accepted being ordinary. From a young age, he was deeply fascinated by electronics. He would spend hours in his family's garage, tinkering with wires and circuits. Even neighbors would say, "This kid will either become an inventor or get into serious trouble." At school, he was smart but rebellious. He questioned authority and ignored rules. Once, just out of boredom, he loosened the screws of a classroom chair so the teacher would fall when sitting. But when it came to technology, it was different. His curiosity led him to Steve Wozniak, a quiet but brilliant computer genius. Jobs, with his vision, energy, and charisma, was the perfect complement. Together, they formed an extraordinary duo. In 1972, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, but dropped out just 6 months later. In his own words, "I decided to stop paying for classes that didn't interest me and stay around to keep learning what really fascinated me." Dropping out wasn't an end, it was a beginning. During that time, he attended calligraphy classes. Perhaps he didn't realize it then, but those lessons would later inspire Apple's distinctive fonts and design philosophy. In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak founded Apple Computer in the Jobs family garage. On wooden tables lay circuit boards, soldering irons, and half-finished prototypes. Their first product was the Apple I computer. It looked simple, but compared to the standards of that era, it was revolutionary. Jobs' vision was clear. Computers shouldn't just be for engineers, they should be for everyone. This idea quickly attracted investors. Entrepreneur Mike Markula gave them $250,000 in funding. At that moment, a small dream in a garage began transforming into a tech giant. Apple II made history. It was one of the first personal computers with color graphics. For the first time, people realized that computers could actually exist in their homes. Sales skyrocketed, and in 1980, Apple went public. Overnight, hundreds of employees became wealthy. Jobs was no longer just a young entrepreneur. He was a global phenomenon. But Steve Jobs' story wasn't only about victories, because on his journey, the greatest lessons were just about to begin. After the massive success of the Apple II and the historic IPO, Steve Jobs was on top of the world. But success had only fueled his obsession with perfection. Jobs was not an easy man to work with. He demanded the impossible. He criticized harshly, and he refused to accept anything less than extraordinary. For him, good was never good enough. Every detail mattered, from the color of a circuit board that no customer would ever see, to the curve of a plastic case. This obsession created products far ahead of their time. But it also created enemies inside his own company. By the early 1980s, Jobs set his sights on creating the Macintosh. He wanted a computer that was not just powerful, but beautiful, intuitive, and personal. He envisioned it as a bicycle for the mind. The Macintosh team worked in secrecy, and Jobs pushed them to extremes. He told them, "Real artists ship." He wanted them to feel like rebels on a mission, not employees. And in 1984, Apple unveiled the Macintosh with one of the most iconic commercials in history, the 1984 ad. It presented Apple as the savior of creativity and individuality. breaking free from the gray, authoritarian world of IBM. The Mac was revolutionary. It introduced a graphical user interface, icons, and a mouse. Things that are standard today but completely alien back then, yet despite its brilliance, sales were disappointing at first. The machine was too expensive, too slow, and Apple's board began to worry. Inside the company, Jobs' leadership style became more of a problem. He was brilliant, yes, but also volatile, demanding, and often cruel. Some employees worshipped him, others feared him. In 1985, the conflict reached its breaking point. John Scully, the CEO Jobs himself had recruited from Pepsi, led a boardroom coup. Jobs was stripped of his power. Imagine this for a moment. The man who founded Apple, who poured his soul into it, was fired from his own company. Jobs later said, "I was out, and it was devastating, but it was also the best thing that ever happened to me." Exiled from Apple, Jobs was only 30 years old. He could have disappeared from history right there, but instead he began a new chapter. He founded a new company called Next. The goal was to create a computer that would revolutionize education and business. The Next computer was sleek, powerful, and years ahead of its time. But there was one problem. It was too expensive. Few could afford it, and sales were disappointing. On the surface, Next looked like a failure. But history would prove otherwise, because its software would later become the foundation of Apple's future. At the same time, Jobs made another move that seemed small but would change the face of entertainment forever. He bought a struggling computer graphics division from George Lucas for $10 million. That company would become Pixar. Under Jobs' vision and relentless push, Pixar transformed from a technology studio into a storytelling powerhouse. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated film in history. It was a triumph. Not only did it earn hundreds of millions at the box office, it proved that technology and art could merge seamlessly to create magic. Pixar went on to release hit after hit: Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Cars, Up, redefining animation and turning Jobs into a Hollywood mogul. Meanwhile, Apple was falling apart without Jobs. The company that once stood for innovation was now drowning in failed products, shrinking market share, and declining relevance. By the mid-1990s, Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy. In a twist of fate, the company decided to buy Next in 1996 for $429 million, not just for its technology, but to bring Steve Jobs back home. The man who had once been cast out returned as the savior. Jobs came back with a vengeance. He simplified Apple's chaotic product line, killed projects that had no future, and focused on design and user experience above all else. His mantra became "Think Different." He recruited brilliant designers like Jony Ive, and together they began creating products that didn't just work, they inspired. In 1998, Apple unveiled the iMac. Its bold, colorful, translucent design was unlike anything on the market. Consumers loved it, and sales soared. It was the first sign that Apple was not just alive, but reborn. Over the next few years, Jobs and his team continued to push the limits. The iPod revolutionized music. Suddenly, you could carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. Then came iTunes, reshaping how the world bought and listened to music. Apple was no longer just a computer company. It was a cultural force. But Jobs' ultimate vision was still ahead. He believed that the future was not just in computers or music players, but in a device that could combine everything, phone, internet, and music, into one seamless experience. In 2007, he walked onto a stage in San Francisco wearing his trademark black turtleneck, jeans, and sneakers, and introduced the iPhone. He said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." And he was right. The iPhone was not just a product, it was a revolution. It put the internet in our hands, changed how we communicate, how we work, how we live. It became the foundation of the modern world. From being fired in disgrace to returning as the architect of one of the greatest comebacks in business history, Steve Jobs' journey was nothing short of epic. It was a story of vision, resilience, failure, and redemption. And in the end, it proved that sometimes being thrown out of your own company is not the end. It's just the beginning of changing the world. By the mid-2000s, Steve Jobs was at the height of his powers. Apple was no longer the scrappy underdog fighting IBM. It had become the company everyone else wanted to be. The iMac had redefined design, the iPod had transformed music, and the iPhone had launched a new era of mobile technology. Jobs himself was seen as a prophet of the digital age, a man whose presentations could electrify entire audiences with just a few words and a simple product reveal. His black turtleneck, blue jeans, and sneakers became a kind of uniform, a symbol of his relentless focus on simplicity. To the world, it looked like Steve Jobs had finally conquered every mountain he set out to climb. But behind the scenes, his greatest battle was just beginning. In 2003, Jobs was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. True to his nature, he didn't immediately follow traditional medical advice. He believed in his own judgment, his own intuition, and for months he tried alternative diets and treatments, hoping to overcome the disease without surgery. Eventually, though, he agreed to an operation. For a time, it seemed like he had beaten it. He returned to the stage, thinner but still sharp, still commanding attention, still announcing products that would reshape entire industries. But the shadow of illness was always there, and over the next years, it would return again and again. Even as his health declined, Jobs pressed forward with almost superhuman determination. He introduced the MacBook Air, the thinnest laptop in the world at the time, slipping it dramatically from an envelope on stage. He launched the App Store, which opened the doors for developers and turned the iPhone into not just a phone, but a platform that would power an entire digital economy. In 2010, he introduced the iPad, a device many critics mocked at first, but which quickly became a new category in itself, changing how we consume media and connect online. Through it all, Jobs stood on stage, delivering his famous "one more thing" moments, leaving audiences stunned at how seamlessly technology and art could blend. But every time he appeared, fans and journalists noticed he looked thinner, more fragile. Rumors about his health became headlines. Jobs, once so full of energy and charisma, was visibly fighting an invisible enemy. In 2009, he took a medical leave and even underwent a liver transplant. Though he returned, the battle was taking its toll. His speeches grew shorter, his body weaker, yet his vision remained as sharp as ever. He continued to lead, continued to demand perfection, continued to inspire those around him. By 2011, Jobs knew his time was running out. In August of that year, he resigned as CEO of Apple. In his resignation letter, he wrote simply, "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come." He handed the reins to Tim Cook, a man he trusted to carry the torch. 2 months later, on October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The news shook the world. Millions of people who had never met him felt as though they had lost someone personal, someone who had touched their lives through the devices in their pockets, the music in their ears, the stories on their screens. Outside Apple stores across the globe, people left flowers, notes, and candles. They left half-eaten apples as symbols of gratitude. Presidents, CEOs, artists, and everyday people all paid tribute. Jobs was not just a businessman, He was a cultural icon. Steve Jobs' legacy is complicated. He was a visionary, a perfectionist, a man who believed that technology could change the world if only it was beautiful, simple, and accessible. He could be harsh, demanding, even cruel at times, but he also inspired thousands of people to create things they never thought possible. He didn't invent every product Apple released, but his ability to see what the world needed before the world knew it. That was his true genius. He once said, "People don't know what they want until you show it to them." And time again, he proved himself right. Today, every time we unlock our smartphones, every time we scroll through apps, every time we connect with the world through a device in our hand, we are living in the world Steve Jobs imagined. He redefined not just technology, but the way we interact with information, the way we communicate with one another, the way we live. His story is not just about computers or phones. It's about what happens when passion, vision, and determination collide. It's about a man who refused to accept the world as it was, and instead insisted on shaping it into what it could be. And perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of Steve Jobs, that failure, rejection, even being cast out of your own company, does not define you. What defines you is how you rise, how you reinvent yourself, and how you leave a mark that lasts long after you're gone. Steve Jobs left such a mark. His influence is woven into the fabric of our everyday lives, into the very tools we use to connect, create, and dream. If you've been inspired by this journey through the extraordinary life of Steve Jobs, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with others who might find meaning in it. And most importantly, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Steve Jobs' life and legacy? Which part of his journey resonates with you the most? And tell me in the comments, who should we explore next? Your ideas might shape the next story we bring to life. Until then, keep dreaming, keep creating, and keep believing in the power of ideas to change the world.